The first presentation that we have today is our keynote speaker, Becca Rodomsky-Bish. She is going to be talking about gardening for birds. Becca is the project leader for the Great Backyard Bird Count and Nest Quest Go at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. She has a Master of Science in Environmental Studies from Antioch University, New England, and a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Biology from Sonoma State University. As an avid gardener with a passion for birds, she actively creates abundant, beautiful gardens while supporting biodiversity in the Northeast. So please, help me welcoming Becca today. Thank you.
Put this on. Hopefully people can hear me. I will talk into this mic. If people in the back can't hear me, will you just raise your hand? We're good? Okay, awesome. I'm gonna get out from behind the podium. I like to be out away from the desk. First of all, I want to say that it's an honor. I was really tickled when Betsy and her team reached out to me to be here today. This is some of my favorite stuff to talk about, so it's always a joy to have people interested in the content. And I'm not going to lie, it's really lovely to be in the room with gardeners and farmers. I'm not always in the room with those folks, and that's really where my original love of birds really started, was out in the garden. So it's nice to be with folks who are doing this work and kind of bringing these worlds together. I do manage the two projects that were mentioned. I also started at the lab with a project that some of you may have heard of called Habitat Network, also known as Yard Map. And it was a project that had been funded from the NSF for about 10 years. We really advocated and encouraged people to create habitats in and around their homes to support birds and biodiversity. So I was really involved in that project. We don't currently have the project at the lab, but we are forging forward and trying to create other ways to integrate those concepts into what we do. So without further ado, here we go. Hopefully, maybe not. Hold on, technical. Now we can advance. Got it. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to start my talk out with some hard to hear news. It's not news that's unfamiliar to you all, I'm sure. But I want you to keep the concept of hope, as Emily Dickinson very nicely articulates here. Birds have so much hope. It's one of the reasons I love them. So as I'm talking about some of the hard to hear stuff that many of us are familiar with, I want you to just kind of keep coming back to the hope and keep coming back to the birds. And I will bring and integrate that hope into the talk as well. Some of you may have seen this graph. It was out and about for a pretty long period of time in the media in 2019. A group of scientists that was led by two at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology did some number crunching, looking back at bird count and observations that we've had for the last 50 years. And they found data and results that even surprised them. So when the scientists themselves who are studying these organisms are shocked by what they find, it's always very interesting. And the sad news is that we've lost about 3 billion birds in the last 30 years, and that is incredibly troubling. And within this paper, the scientists did a really solid job of outlining many of the pressures that are causing these declines. And for those of you that study pollinators and other organisms, they're probably very similar, right? We know a lot of these pressures aren't just birds. This goes across the gamut. But some of the ones that they identified as being high pressure for birds is, no surprise, deforestation. We're losing our forests at a rapid rate, particularly our boreal forests. And if any of you do feed birds at home, you may have been lucky enough this year to see some evening grosbeaks They do often drop down into our region in the wintertime. They do something called erupting, which means they move from their boreal forests, which they normally are, and nest in, and they drop down to find more resources. And I happen to have a flock of about 34 of these all winter long at my feeder. It was delightful. It makes winter go by much faster. And then actually 6 of them stayed on my property and are actually nesting, which is unusual. They generally go back to their winter or their nesting areas. So I was lucky enough to keep some here, maybe because they're finding resources that they need, right? Birds are smart. That's what they do. Agricultural intensification is also a big issue for birds. We all know that large-scale agriculture generally leans towards monocultures, and monocultures generally don't support as many bird species. So not only are we losing the space that could have more diverse habitat that can support birds, we are also putting pressure on insects that need to nest in grasslands, because grasslands are often what is cleared. Eastern meadowlarks are a beautiful bird species. We see them generally around here in true grasslands, but their numbers are dwindling very quickly. I live in a place that I manage grasslands. When I moved back here about 14 years ago, I saw these birds regularly, and I have yet to see them again for the last 7 years, which makes me very sad. So we are losing these species, and I can attest for that just in the short time that I've lived in this region. Pesticides, applications of things that we sometimes do and do not always know the long-term impact of, is putting pressure on birds. And one of the main reasons is because it affects their food source, right? So swifts, swallows, we call them aerial insectivores. They need insects. So when we apply things that take out all insects, which some do and some don't, of course, there are targeted applications, but we do affect their food resources. And that is putting a lot of pressure. These particular species at the lab, we're kind of focusing on these this year because we are very shocked and surprised by the quick declines that we're seeing in various species across the board. And then, of course, development, right? We build, and we don't always replace the native stuff when we build, right? We often put in ornamentals or other types of things that birds and insects may or may not recognize. So development puts a lot of pressure on birds. And this is particularly true for migratory species. So these, does anybody see these in and around their property? They just returned. Yes, good. They're so beautiful, right? Baltimore Orioles. They're so beautiful, and they're just a joy to see. And I don't know about all of you, but when they return, I always am like, oh, they're back. They made it. Their journeys are long, right? These birds migrate thousands and thousands of miles to spend their winter down in warmer climates because they're very wise to eat insects and nectar and other sorts of things they can't get up here in the winter. But their migration is very treacherous, right? As you can imagine, if they're flying across areas like this and they're looking to refuel, they don't always know where to stop, right? So development can put a lot of pressure on birds, especially during migration, when they still need to stop over and resupply and get some food before they continue on. And I would be remiss not to mention outdoor cats. They put a huge pressure, arguably one of the highest points of pressure on bird. And I love cats. I have a cat. They're wonderful. When they are outside, they're predators, right? And we can't fault them for that. It's just their natural instinct. And I just came across this image. The Macaulay Library is where people upload their bird images that they contribute to the lab. And this picture just struck me because the kitty's just doing what the kitty does, right? This is a human challenge that we have to overcome. And if we can keep our cats inside, we're going to help birds, we're going to help fledglings, and so forth. And then this one, across the board, we're seeing, obviously, climate change is a real issue. And the first time I saw this image, I went, oh, that's sweet. And then I stopped and I looked a little closer and I thought, yeah, tree swallows don't want to be in snow. That's not what they do, right? They're insect eaters. So this flock got caught in a snowstorm, possibly during migration, and they're surviving by kind of hunkering together and sharing body heat to get through these cold snaps. But these cold snaps are becoming more and more common and often in unusual places. A couple of years ago, you may have heard in the media that birds were literally dropping out of the sky. They didn't know why. Scientists kind of moved in and were collecting the birds and trying to figure out what was going on. And what they found was that these birds were literally starving to death. And it wasn't necessarily exposure to anything. They just weren't able to find places to refuel in their migration. It was mostly warblers, swallows, and swifts that were coming out of the sky. And what happened was there were fires happening in the Northwest. So the birds, as they were moving, were able to use their normal migration. And so they were kind of veering off their normal migration courses, trying to land, trying to resupply and find food, and we're not able to. And that was compounded by a very bizarre cold snap that moved through the Southwest at a very, not a time where their cold snaps were occurring. And these birds literally had no energy. They had no fuel in their bodies. So these are the kinds of pressures that are more and more commonly happening with climate change. And then lights and windows is another one that people don't always realize, but birds see just like us. A lot of people don't know that, but if you look around, that's very similar to the kind of the perspective that a bird's going to have. So if you're flying over this very well-lit area at night, because most birds migrate at night, most songbirds migrate at night, you might be interested, right? So you drop down into the city. You maybe find a tree or a shrub and you're hunkering down, and the next morning you wake up and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go on. I'm going to Canada because that's where I'm going to spend my nesting season. And when you look up, if you see clouds and trees, that's what the birds see too. So this is where birds get in trouble with windows, is they get lured into places where the lights are, they try to get out, and then bam, they hit windows, and we lose a lot of birds that way. And a lot of people don't actually realize the reason is because of how songbirds migrate. So we don't frequently see geese and ducks and so forth, sometimes, but not always in our windows, in our residential and building areas. But songbirds migrate at a lower level. And so because of those, their hazards are much greater than birds that can get higher up and above some of those obstacles. So windows and protecting windows, especially during migration, turning lights off, especially during migration, are all things that we can be doing to support birds. So that is the hardest part of my presentation to get through. That is the dark stuff. We know many of these pressures are affecting more than birds, but they are having a huge impact on birds. So let's get back to the hope and Emily Dickinson. When I talked about 3 billion birds, that is total net loss. But there are good stories in what we've done in the last 30 years, and I want to see those stories continue to multiply. So wetland species, this is a wood duck pictured here, are actually on the rise, significant. They're one of the best stars of success. And why? Because we've preserved wetlands. We've made aggressive moves to protect areas that are water-based, whether it's our rivers and our lakes, our coastlines, our mangroves. We have made drastic changes to our wetland management, and the birds have come back. Woodpeckers, one of my favorite. We have lots of beautiful woodpeckers in this region year-round. They are also on the rise. Guess why? Human management, right? In the 50s and 60s, less so in the 60s, but in the 50s, we were taking out dead and dying trees from our forests, that local forests, state forests, federal lands, at a rapid rate because we were afraid of fires, we were afraid of leaving those dead and dying trees. And what we found was if we stopped doing that, we were helping the primary nesting birds like the woodpecker. And these birds will not only feast on the organisms that may be threatening or killing those trees as it decomposes, but they actually make the first cavities in trees, which then help eastern bluebirds and chickadees and nuthatches and all the secondary nesting cavity makers that go in and use what the woodpeckers build. So if we leave the trees intact, we actually bring back some of the ecosystem in terms of the birds that need them. So another great success story. Raptors. Another one that we have seen huge rises in. I know a lot of people email me at the lab, I saw a bald eagle. I have never seen a bald eagle in this area before. They're coming back and they're in places that they were 30 or 40 years ago, but because of pressures such as DDT, they were having a hard time nesting, we were losing them, but that is shifting now and we're seeing a return. And so hopefully all of you, your brain is churning and going, it's us. We are the factor. When we make changes in our policies, when we make changes in how we manage our landscapes, even our own yards, schools, communities, we can bring the bird populations back, and we have. So let's keep that going. Many of you are in the room, and this probably rings true for you, right? We have a monoculture love as well in the United States, the monoculture of turf and lawn. And that is shifting. And it's really inspiring to me that even in the short time I've been in this field, I have seen the shift. happening. Instead of considering ourselves responsible by keeping a nice tidy lawn, nice and short, the neighbors like it too. It's shifting over to recognizing that we can find beauty in other ways of how we manage our landscapes too, by building ecosystems, by putting plants in, by encouraging the pollinators and the birds and so forth. And so we're starting to slowly see this shift, and we're starting hopefully to see the benefits of that shift. This is a picture from one of my rain gardens on my property. In addition to doing this professionally, personally, I run a small CSA for 3 other families. It's very small. And then I sustainably grow and can and process food for myself. So I do this both for the wildlife, but also for my family as well. And creating and maintaining native gardens in property with which you have authority is one of the best things you can do for birds and biodiversity. And the good news is that they notice. And they want it too. This was a research project that was done a couple of years ago out of the University of Massachusetts. And in habitats where there was non-native, like Rosa multiflora, which you probably all recognize, pictured there, that that thrushes will eat. If they are presented with the non-natives and the natives in equal amounts, they will prefer the native berries, right? So the birds pay attention. They are smart. Their genetics have co-evolved for years and years. So they get it, and they want to find the native stuff too. And native plants themselves are super important. Those of you in the room who are already planting natives probably know, man, they're easy. You put them in the ground and they go nuts. And it's true. And the reason is they're acclimated, right? They're acclimated to this area. They're acclimated to the conditions. And one of the things I love about native plants is that they're very much synced with what lives around here, what it needs when. So I don't know if you noticed that almost at the same time that hummingbirds are returning to our area, the columbines are blooming. One of their favorites when they move in, right? So there's this harmonious sort of connection with the natural world that native plants naturally have. And they're providing resources at the times that things need them. There's also some research that there's medicinal properties. And this really shouldn't surprise us, right? Animals are complex organisms, but there's research that bees and birds will use native resources when they're having stomach issues or fighting a bacteria or a fungus. This is fascinating. And so what if we don't have those native plants available? What if they can't find those things? Then we're also putting an added pressure on them, right? And then arguably one of the most important reasons why native plants are so critical for birds in particular is because of the caterpillars. So moths and butterflies lay caterpillars. And I'll show you a slide in a minute. Those relationships with native plants for the butterflies and moths is often very tight. And so if we don't have the native plants, the moths and caterpillars can't lay their eggs. And if they can't lay their eggs, then the birds can't use the caterpillars for food resources and for nesting. Another Baltimore oriole. I love this bird. You can tell. I have a couple of pictures of them. That is predominantly what 94, depending on the research, 94 to 96% of all North American songbirds feed their young caterpillars. Not the seeds at your feeder, not the nectar, not the nuts, not the fruit. They're feeding them caterpillars. So if we want to have our birds have healthy populations and be able to repopulate, we need to have the caterpillars. Doug Ptolemy is a gentleman who, if you've not read his work, I highly recommend it. He's one of the lead researchers out of the University of Delaware that's done a lot of quantification on this. And in his research, he found at minimum chickadees, which is his focal species, need 7,000 upwards to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of young. One. And that's one pair of birds. That is a lot of caterpillars. So how do we grow that much food for birds? We grow them by using our native plants. And these are the 2 texts that I highly recommend you check out if you like this stuff and want to read some of Ptolemy's work. They're very accessible, and he's an inspiration to read. But the ones that he has found to be the most bang for your buck, if you have the capacity, is oaks. And we all know oaks generally are either very large shrubs or trees, so not everybody can do this. But if you have the capacity and have space that you can manage, oaks, go oaks every time. I don't know about you all, but we have lost several ash on our property. And so we're replanting almost every single one with a variety of native oaks. So if you need to replant, lean into these as much as possible. Across North America, you can support more than 4,000 different kinds of organisms. And that's big and small. So that goes up to, your deers and your bears and so forth too. So getting back to that relationship idea, we often talk about the monarchs and the milkweeds, right? That really tight relationship where monarchs need to have milkweed to lay their eggs on, though they can nectar on lots of different things. The same is true for many moths and caterpillars. This is the Baltimore checkered spot. This has become one of my favorites because I've been intentionally trying to lure it to my property and successfully did about 3 years ago, and now they're very prevalent. But they also have a very tight relationship. They will feed on milkweed, but they really need white turtlehead in order to lay their eggs. So planting white turtlehead is pretty easy to do. It's available. You all are relatively local. I know there's many local nurseries, and I'm going to talk about that towards the end, but Plantsman Nursery has lots of turtlehead if you live in this area. There's a pink and a white version. And so really trying to understand the ecology of the things that live around here and planting for them is really rewarding. And I know it's cliche, but if you plant it, they will come. I have seen this happen. So this is a picture of a garden. A lot of people, when I start talking about this, get overwhelmed. I get it. It's a lot of work, but it's also so much fun. This is a garden that I installed with my family in 2018. There's my little man, who's now much bigger than that, and my husband, and we wanted to create sort of a connection between some trees we had in the front yard. I will say I've been on the property I'm on right now for about 6 years, almost 6 years. And it takes time. When you engage in this work, be patient with yourself, do it in small parts. If you have a lot of lawn like I do, take it a step at a time. But what's cool is the results are quick. So we installed a dogwood shrub area about 5 years ago. And then this is what it looks like in the spring. It fills out so quickly. This is one of the beauties of natives. And so I have a mixture of a nativar, the red-stemmed red osier dogwood, and then mostly wild-type red osier. They produce a great flower for the pollinators in the spring, right about now, and then they produce beautiful white berries. I have catbirds that nest now every year in there. So it's really amazing to see how close they are coming. Here's another spot that I created just 3 years ago. I wanted to make an outdoor dining space for my family, but I wanted us to be surrounded by the wildlife. And so in just 3 years, this is what it looks like now, and it's still arguably very young. So this kind of work can happen, and it can happen fast, especially when we choose natives and we allow them to do what they do best, which is fill in very, very quickly. For those of you that are doing more agriculture, I really encourage you to think about, and perhaps you already are, how to integrate habitat in your farms, because there's lots of ecological benefits when you do this. I mentioned I grow for myself and 3 small families. This is a raised bed area that I put in, and I made intentionally this horseshoe habitat around this area. In these particular beds, in this image, I have beans and watermelons in the front, lettuce, asparagus, onions, et cetera, et cetera. And then middle of the season, it just fills in. And to me, this is awesome. Some people get overwhelmed. Oh my God, look at all those plants. But to me, that's what's fun about all of this. And I never, ever have to manual pollinate. When I first started farming and I wasn't integrating a lot of native habitat, I had to, especially at the beginning of the season, hand pollinate my squash and my melons because they weren't getting pollinated. I have that problem. I don't have that problem at all anymore. The bees are everywhere and they are doing the work for me. So on that note, when we integrate habitat with gardening and farming, we really can reap a joint mutual benefit. One of my favorite stories when I was doing the Habitat Network was a farm in California, very large farm, who was having a horrible time with vermin. And they were using rat poison. And then they decided to sort of turn the page and say, let's just try to create more habitat and build nest boxes for barn owls. And sure enough, that one action of creating habitat, putting up nest boxes, the birds came and their vermin population dropped. Not overnight, but within a couple of years, they were able to not poison their rodents, and they were able to utilize the help of the birds. I have seen this firsthand, very personally on my property. Anybody who loves viburnums know that there are several species of them in this area that are devoured by the viburnum leaf beetle, which the adult version is up there pictured. This is my American cranberry in my front yard that I love. It's one of my favorite shrubs. Again, a great flower for pollinators, and then produces these awesome fruits for the birds that they frequently will consume right during migration. It's a very high antioxidant berry for them. When I first got this shrub, I was so frustrated because I immediately noticed, you can kind of see in the image the holes. I immediately noticed it was being attacked, and I didn't actually know at the time what was going on. And then I figured it out, and lo and behold, like just hundreds and hundreds of caterpillars emerge because they overwinter in the stick bark of the viburnums, and then they come out in the spring right when the leaves are coming out. They can defoliate before you even know what's happening at times. And so I got really frustrated, and the first year or two I went out and was just manually taking them off. I would spend an hour just manually stripping these, putting them in soapy water. I didn't want to spray because I didn't want to do that to the wildlife I'm supporting. And so this year is year 3, and I'm not making this story up. It just happened to cross paths with this conference. I was looking out the window, and I had visited the shrubs once and stripped what I could find. And then I had noticed, I didn't get them all. I need to go back out there. So last weekend, I went out to go and manage this again because I saw them, and I could not find a caterpillar. It was wild. And then I was like, what? I mean, I usually have to do this many times in the spring, but I had seen sparrows in there. I had seen catbirds in there. I had seen robins in there. They beat me to them, and they were feeding them to their young because everything is nesting right now on my property. So birds can be a real powerful part of our landscape if we create the habitat and support them and nurture them so that they stay and help us with the important work. So now I'm going to flip through, for those of you that are plant lovers, some really powerhouse plants that you could consider integrating into your landscape if you don't have them, or add more of them. Early flowering plants like the Juneberry, Serviceberry, that goes by lots of common names. I'm a common name person mostly because I'm not a botanist formally in training. I kind of came into this the back doorway, so I use common names a lot. House wrens are one of our earliest arrivers. I don't know about y'all. I know some people have mixed feelings about house wrens because they can be pesky to some of our other nesting birds. They can poke holes into other birds' eggs, but I love them. They're feisty, almost as feisty as hummingbirds, and they show up pretty early. And when they show up, there's not a lot flowering, but there is Juneberry flowering. And they're not necessarily eating the flowers. Sometimes I've seen them, but mostly what they're doing is they're hunting. And so having early pollinator stuff is really important for birds, especially migratory birds, because they're going to use it as habitat for hunting, because insects are so nutrient rich in proteins and fats and so forth. So thinking about having early blooming stuff on your property to support birds is really important. I already mentioned the columbine, a favorite among our early arriving hummingbirds, really powerful in terms of nectar resource. And a lot of times when you go to nurseries, you're going to see these, double flowers, yellows, purples, magentas. This is the wild type color. It's like a salmon color with a yellow middle. And trying to find the pure wild type is going to be your most ecological bang for your buck. So really trying to lean into the wild types. A lot of these plants get hybridized, and there's mixed results in the literature and research about whether hybrids provide the same ecological benefit. And we can talk a little bit more about that because I know some people have interest in that. Warblers are another big one that are migrants, and they need lots of insects. These are big insect eaters. So having places for warblers to land and forage is incredibly important. So as you can see, probably has a nest of young, and I hope at least, and they're going to take that big hunk of insects back to feed. This is red osier after the berries have come out. This is a wonderful, powerful powerhouse species to include in properties if you have some space. As you can see, this was the picture I showed where over time they fill in really quick. So you want to plant these someplace where they can fill in really quick. They do really well in wet clay soils, which is what a lot of us have in this region. So integrating red osier, they can tolerate shade or sun, is another great species to consider to add to your palette if you don't already have them. And I know hummingbirds are loved, so a couple hummingbird species, Oswego tea and Monardas in general, the Monarda family or the bee balm family is going to be really great for hummingbirds. Cardinal flower is another really great one for wet areas. If you have a wetland, if you have a pond, planting cardinal flower in and around it is probably one of the favorite flowers of hummingbirds. I can go out and put my lawn chair not too far away from my cardinal flower and just watch them feed all day. They love it. It's one of their favorite resources. Elderberry. And there's lots of different species of elderberry in this area. There's red and there's purple. I mostly grow purple. The thrushes, the robins, the thrashers, the catbirds love the berries. And these also ripen right around migration, right before migration. And so I know that they're loading up on them for their journeys. That makes me feel good to know that they're going to have some food in that belly as they make their big flights. But elderberry is another one. It's mostly a sun-loving, but it's another one that's going to spread. So if you integrate this into your landscape, make sure you do it in a place where you don't mind it getting big. Coneflowers are great, and we can talk specifically about these for those that are interested. There's a little bit of a mixed review in the native plant world about coneflowers, mostly because they've been so hybridized. But for the most part, the seed heads are dense. American robin is the one exception to that 94 to 96%. They do not feed caterpillars to their young. They actually feed them seeds. And if you've ever noticed, sometimes you'll have the goldfinch at your feeders a little bit longer because they don't nest until really starting late June, early July, because they're waiting for the seeds to be abundant enough that they can feed them to their young. So these are one of the later nesting birds in this area, and they actually are an exception. They don't feed them caterpillars. So things like coneflower is going to be really helpful for them. This is probably one of my favorite birds. They will literally follow me around the yard when I'm out there working. They are like jays, right? They're so people shaking their head. They're so curious. Sometimes I think I'm going to throw them treats or something. Yes, and they talk to you, of course. Their language is very proficient and developed. Yeah, they're hilarious. They also are really great at eating lots of things that are in pests up in our area. So catbirds are fun. Any kind of a viburnum species, they're going to benefit from those nutrient-rich berries. And a lot of viburnums have that beautiful fall color. So it's a win-win, right? We get that beauty in the fall as well. This is one that's always a little bit of a debate. It's not really a debate, but a lot of people resist goldenrods. We have a lot of them naturally in our fields. I really highly encourage gardeners to put them in their gardens too. Goldenrods are one of the most critical late season foraging areas for birds. So warblers are not going to eat the seeds, but they're going to eat the insects, the bees, the spiders, the butterflies, etc., that are going to be nectaring on these flowers late in the season. And it's one of our latest flowering plants. And there's a couple of species that don't aggressively spread in gardens, like zigzag goldenrod, which is great in shade, and gray goldenrod, which is great in sun, mostly sun, a little bit of shade's okay. Those types of goldenrods will still produce a really great flower, but they won't take over your garden beds. So integrating them is critical. Along the same line as asters, another one where people go, ah, we have too many asters. Yes, we have a lot of asters, but they're so critical. They're so important. Some of them even flower later than goldenrod. So having these is important. The seed heads they produce are eaten by lots and lots of songbirds well into and through the winter. So having asters is critical for our gardens as well. I just love this picture of, I have yet to see a hoary redpoll, but how fun, right? To be able to get these images. This is a late fall, early winter image. The seeds are critical of asters and goldenrod to get a lot of these songbirds through the winter. They'll take them right off of the plants, and it's hilarious to watch when you catch them. They'll also forage on the ground because the seeds will stay available to them. I have not seen a hoary redpoll yet at my feeders. I keep hoping. Maybe one of these years. They're another bird that's eruptive. So they're mostly in Canada and northern United States, but they will drop down when you need resources. Red-breasted nuthatches and white-breasted, one of my favorites. A really, really late flowering, fantastic shrub to consider integrating is witch hazels. They produce this amazingly yellow-red flower. Again, a foraging opportunity for birds that are looking for maybe those late insects that aren't quite hunkered down for the winter. And then the fruits or the nuts that are produced are also very helpful for wildlife. And then probably one of the latest season berry options, I really encourage people in the Northeast to have this shrub on their land if they can, is the winterberry. You do need a male and a female, so you need to have both males and females, and nurseries generally will sex the plants for you. Yeah. Sure. One male. Yes. There you go. Yep. 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 So yeah, so make sure that you have a male and a female, and they will pollinate or they will create beautiful berries. And what's cool about these berries, you can kind of think of them like the fine wine. The birds won't touch them They'll usually produce a reddish color by late fall, but the birds won't touch them. They won't touch them. And then all of a sudden in January or February, when the frosts really get going, the berries get sweeter, the sugars get more concentrated, and they will strip a bush, sometimes overnight. So really a great shrub to have and integrate into your landscape. And when I'm talking to people about gardening, a lot of people that are new to it, you know, we often do kind of what I call island gardening, where you'll like put a plant and then put some mulch around it and then, you know, walk away, which can be good. It can be okay. It's better than nothing, especially if it's a native. But the denser and the more diverse and the more layered we plant our gardens, the more ecological resource they're going to provide. So this was a garden design that we created when I worked for Habitat Network, where the people sent us an image and said, I want to create more diversity here in this spot. And you can see that it's in a forest. They don't lack for trees. So we didn't need piece. We added some shorter tree recommendations. We added some smaller shrubs, some kind of middle foraging forbs, and then some ground cover. So really thinking, when you're thinking about gardening, trying to sort of hit lots of different layers is a great way to go. And then for those of you that might be more advanced in your gardening, I really encourage thinking about doing a planting palette. I did one of these a couple of years ago because I did notice that I had gaps in when I was providing resources. Thinking about successional resource supply for birds and biodiversity is really critical. So if you only have stuff that's flowering or providing resources in the summer and the fall and maybe into the winter, what about your early spring stuff? So this is a way that you can do it. Over to the side, you can kind of, if you're targeting certain species, you can list out species, or if you know that the plants provide those species, you can list them out. And then you can list out the plants themselves, organize them by how they're growing in the landscape and how they naturally will grow. And then the calendar is my favorite part. You can map out sort of when is the flowering and the nectaring available, when is the fruit developing, when are the seeds developing. And you can really start to get a holistic picture of how your landscape is providing resources. And then over to the left, if you're interested in color dynamics, like do I have too much white, too much yellow, how can I integrate that? You can do a palette. And then of course, we always want to know what resources are being provided and how big or small these plants are, so we can kind of companion them and know sort of what they're going to look like when they're in their mature form. So planting palettes are really fun, and it's a really great way to get a holistic picture of your landscape. And then last but not least, I put these slides in because Betsy thought it would be a good idea to talk about it specifically for those of us that might be newer on this journey. We often go to nurseries and they talk about hardiness zones, right? And hardiness zones has a good value in terms of knowing temperatures that things can live or not live at, et cetera. But it doesn't tell us about sort of the nitty gritties of our local areas. So thinking about ecoregions and microclimates is really important when we're talking about native plants, because in New York State alone, we have more than 6 different ecoregions. So what you can grow downstate, you may not be able to grow upstate, or you may not even be able to grow into the Adirondacks, right? So thinking about ecoregions is critical. And for those of you that don't know about the Pollinator Partnership, I highly recommend downloading their guides. It's super easy. It works for Canada and the United States. You can go in, you enter your zip code, and it will produce for you. You can print it or just have a digital copy. It's like 24 pages of incredible information about your ecoregion. And the ecoregion I live in is actually slightly different than where we are right now. And I only live a couple hours away, right? So it really gives you some focused recommendations, and they look like this. That's the cover of one of them. Audubon Native Plant Finder tool is also powerful. This becomes really helpful when you're starting to think about what birds you want to attract. Like, wow, there's orioles here. I've never seen an oriole in my yard. I'd really like to know how I can get orioles in my yard. Well, great. You can go to the Native Plant Finder list. You can enter in your zip code, just like the pollinator, and it will spit out a couple of really fun things. The local resources is critical. It'll give you a list of nurseries in and around your region. And this works for all of the United States, not into Canada, unfortunately, yet. But it'll give you nurseries that carry some percentage of native plants. And you can call those nurseries and you can say, hey, I'm looking for such and such, or how many natives do you carry? So the Native Plant Finder tool is cool. And then you can also type in the names of birds that you want to support, and it'll tell you right there next to the plants what bird species those plants will support. So really fun tools. It's a good way to do your digging when you're trying to piece together what you want to grow in your properties. And hopefully by now in my talk, I've convinced you that birds are cool and they're an important part of thinking about gardening in our landscapes. And if you don't know much about birds, I wanted to provide a little bit of information about how you can begin your journey to learn a little bit more. Frequently, this question comes up when people first start gardening, like, I don't actually really know what's around here. I mean, I saw this like bird fly in and it had like a stripe and a red head maybe or something. This is natural, right? This is how the curiosity begins. And the lab has designed a tool to build on that curiosity. If you have not heard of it, it's called Merlin Bird ID. Raise your hand if you have Merlin. Oh my gosh, lots of Merlin lovers. Awesome. Cool. So I don't have to go into this too much, but yes. You got ID'd as a turkey. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I had somebody say the same thing there in Michigan, and the horns on the cars, they were IDing as trumpeter swans. So yes, it is not 100% accurate, but it's a fun tool. It is a fun tool. And I am going to take questions in just a minute. So I'm just going to push through the end here since so many people are Merlin lovers. Hopefully those hands encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't already. It's a super fun tool. It builds on the simplicity of just seeing a bird for the first time. So let's say you see this red bird and you're like, God, I don't know. I don't think that's a cardinal. That looks a little different. What is that beautiful red bird? Merlin will ask you where you are. It'll ask you when you saw it, right? Because during migration, you're going to see different things than winter. It'll ask you the size of the bird based on kind of 4 pretty simple birds that we're familiar with: sparrows, robins, crows, and geese. And then it'll ask you to pick up to 3 colors. So for this bird example, we're going to just pick red, and maybe there's some black up there. And then it's going to ask you where you saw the bird, right? So pretty basic questions. The first 2 will almost automatically generate for you if you're using it on the day and the location. And sure enough, it's going to give you a list of options. And in this particular case, it is a scarlet tanager, which you are lucky to see in this region because they're pretty private birds, mostly forest dwellers. You don't always get to see them. You'll hear them more often. And then as you alluded to, Merlin has 2 other really fun features. You can take a photo of a bird if you're fast enough. I'm not always fast enough, but if you can get a photo, you can ID it with photo. And then the most fun is sound ID. You can literally go out. This is, forgot to mention, this is a phone app available on Android and an iPhone. You can hit play and literally the birds will ID for you in real time on your phone. It is fun. Yep. And it'll flash so that you can start to learn the sound, right? Because I don't know about y'all, hearing is hard for me. I'm still learning my bird calls, but every time it flashes and you hear it and your brain starts to make a connection between that sound of the bird and what you're seeing. So Merlin's fun. Lots of already converts in the room, which is fabulous. So if you haven't checked it out, please do. And I would be happy to take some questions. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
I have one. You wanna use the microphone?
So the question is it just white turtle head that's good for the checker spot, or is the pink okay also?
Yes, both are fine. The pink's a little more hybridized than the white, but both will attract the white checkered spot. Yeah. Oh, I think we were supposed to mic you.
Oh. Or the window, crashing with, like, do they do anything to help all of that?
Yes, and I didn't put up pictures of that. Let me see. I did leave some photos at the end. Let me see if I have any pictures. Oops, that's okay. There are lots of options for it. The cheapest and easiest thing to do if you're doing a property that's yours that you can, if it's a school or a business office, you can put temper paint up, really fun for kids, a little project during migration. You can put sticky notes up and make patterns. Basically, you need to have some kind of a thing right in front of the windows that is no more than about 2 inches apart. That's the cheapest. You can put masking tape on windows, screens. Screens on windows also will deter birds. And then on larger buildings, for those of you that have been at the lab and some of the main buildings on main campus at Cornell, you will see the long, thin wires. They're called Zen curtains. And a lot of buildings are using those. There's also some fancy sticker decals that you can put on windows. So there's lots of solutions. And if you're interested in learning more about them and kind of figuring out what's best for you, the American Bird Conservancy, ABC, has great information on their website, and they'll link you out to resources where you can actually get access to those window treatments. Good question. Yeah.
Birds being black, building a new house,
Mhm.
and all sorts of things to architects.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do those end curtains have to be outside or can they be placed inside?
The what was the first time? That outside. They need to be outside. Yes, they do. They need to be
So
outside.
we do have microphones, yeah, thank you. We've got some others too, so put your hand up if you have a question, we'll get you a mic.
Like the Zen curtains, we just did white wax pencil on the outside of our windows because we have bird feeders and a hawk would come down and the birds would go crazy. But since we've put the lines on our windows, we haven't had more than maybe 2 birds out of the last 3 years come into the windows.
Nice. So you've seen the personal benefit of it. Great. Cool. Yeah. And you don't have to buy a product. You can use materials that you have available as long as they mimic the same idea, right? A thin wire about 2 inches spread apart across your windows. That's great. It's good to hear personal stories of success with those kinds of changes. There's somebody right there. Yep.
Hi, is there a tool to help you put together a pollinator palette?
The document there. I have an old document. I could share it. Is everybody going to get a follow-up email?
You can send, if you send them to me, I will send it out.
Yeah, I'll send one out in that final email. So then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can make them on a spreadsheet. It's pretty straightforward, but I can send a template out.
Hi, I have a question about the oaks. It's sort of a challenge in some ways. So I moved here from the Pacific Northwest where we have sudden oak death as a major problem. And I watched it killing all my favorite oaks. It was very sad. And so I always am struck a little bit when there is, and I love Ptolemy's work, but this encouragement, a lot of one thing. And because we don't know what's going to happen, there's an insect that might come through, how the climate's going to affect soil moisture. So I'm curious about like, why not the top 10 caterpillar hosting trees, and let's just plant them all a lot and hedge our bets.
Yep.
It's just like kind of a doubting Thomas question in some ways, but I'm always like, more diversity is better.
Mhm.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I'm sure you agree.
I 100%
Yes.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And do you know what
this-
the other, I mean, hickories maybe?
Yep. Willows are high
Willows.
up on the list. So if you research Doug Ptolemy, just Google his name and say top plants for pollinators. He has done research and he has outlined the top 10. He always pushes oaks, I think, because unfortunately, in a lot of our cities and developed areas, when we go and we plant trees, we often don't plant natives. And so,
true,
a lot of people move into neighborhoods and there's Norway maples, for example, right?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the reasons he pushes that is because when you're talking to landscape designers and so forth, it's like, if you're going to plant trees because this is a new neighborhood, please put in oaks.
Mhm.
But I'm with you. I think diversity is key. I see it in my own property because my father-in-law experienced the spongy moth explosion. And so he planted ash. Lots of ash because they took out everything else. And now we had a big spongy moth outbreak and now we're having ash. So yes, we need to diversify and have lots of options. Yeah,
Thank
good point.
you. I love the presentation, by the way.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I have a question about
Malfunctioning microphones.
Okay. There we go. The Merlin app, if you know what a bird is, can you go in and say, because I tried in the spring, there was a mockingbird, which is not normal for our region, but he was just passing through and I knew what it was and I couldn't actually say, and do they use the data for anything?
Yes.
Okay.
good question. So if you know the species of birds and you want to report them, the better tool to use is eBird, which is a sister tool. I didn't talk about that today, but eBird is sort of the powerhouse data tool where bird observations go into. It's great to use if you know your birds. If you don't know your birds, Merlin's a good place to start. So the way that Merlin and eBird talk to one another is what's really cool is when people use Merlin, and we're seeing this specifically with the bald eagles, we're getting them reported in areas that we haven't seen them in years. And so eBird now is updating its own algorithms to include birds in areas that people are identifying in Merlin. So they talk to each other by saying, oh, people are seeing these birds and identifying these birds. So now we have to update our algorithm and include those birds in that area. Same thing for time of year. When people report and ID birds that are seen in places we don't normally see them at unusual times, we can update our algorithms so that people know that those birds can be found there. And then maybe you're going to get it fed to you in Merlin the next time you choose those same. So yeah, it's pretty complicated AI, and they do talk to each other and feed the data. And then eBird is one of the biggest conservation tools that's used by scientists all over the world. It was used in about 150 publications, research publications last year. So absolutely the data is used. And it's been an important part of conservation efforts around the world in terms of knowing where birds are and aren't and why.
You mentioned invasives.
Yes.
So if you're on a teeter and where's your effort going to go? Removing invasives or planting?
Yeah, such a good question. And I knew this would come up because I know there's people that are experts in this room in invasives that I am not an expert in invasives, but I battle them regularly. It's a really good question. I think my personal answer in my own land management is focus on the plants. And so the red osier shrub area that has gone gangbusters, I battle English ivy like nobody's business. And I'm never going to win, right? But if I plant dense enough and I plant enough, it doesn't win in the sense that we can cohabitate with one another. So that's one of the reasons I lean into plants. Plant. You have to manage. There are some invasives that are worse than others. But I've been battling bindweed in one particular patch that was there when I moved in, and it's awful, but I'm getting ahead of it, and it's every year it's less and less. So persistence with invasives, especially if you're not going to use topical applications, is key. And just like with insects, right, we have to know the ecology of the plants. So when do they flower? Making sure you take those flowers off when they flower will get you ahead of even, rooting them out. So understanding the ecology of plants and the insects in terms of invasives is critical. Same thing with the viburnum leaf beetle, right? Yeah. I learned the ecology of it. I figured out if I can snip off all those wood pieces starting in November and I'm diligent until March, I'm going to have less. And then I'll still have some, but the birds are going to help me out, right? So it's like a multitude, just like having diverse plants. It's the same concept. We have to be hitting these things at lots of different angles, which takes a lot of time, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something here. So I just finished the course for Master Gardener in Onondaga County. So I learned how much I don't know. So that was great. But one of my colleagues shared that she got a piece of land and she was able to walk it for free with a member of the New York State DEC to be able to first just identify, what the first steps would be with regard to what needed to be removed before she started adding anything. So I don't know if that's available to all residents of New York State, but I think it would be a great thing to do.
That's great advice. Does anybody know if that's a service that's generally provided?
In Madison County, they have been trying to let people know that that is available. They want homeowners to contact them. Also, I think Soil and Water Conservation District can also do some of that as well. They want to visit people's homes. They want to help them mitigate invasives or, whatever issues they have. So depending on your county and there and what they.
It's going in and out. Yeah, thank you for that. That's great advice.
Yeah, I know. It's like Merlin for plants.
Yep. We should swap that one out. You want to try that?
Has excuse me.
So the iNaturals iNaturalist Seek app for identifying invasives. And the real advantage there is it's actually using social media tools to track and accumulate data. So if you don't have someone that can come out to your property, it's a pretty neat way to do it.
Yeah, iNaturalist is great.
iNaturalist, I is in little tiny I, like everything on the internet. And then, yeah,
Mhm.
or little tiny ones.
And-
And then the Seek is the name of the app, SEEK.
And iNaturalist is great for identifying lots of things, right? It does plants, but it'll do insects. It even has a bird piece. There's also some questions back here I want to make sure we get to. Will you wait 1 second?
In the
Go ahead.
back.
She's been having her hand up. Yeah.
I just want to let people know there's, Cornell also has a Master Forest Owner Volunteer Program where they train folks to do woods walks for free on people's properties to help them understand, or identify invasives, just learn what they have, whether the forest is healthy or not. So that's another option for people as well. So it's,
Great.
you can request a woods walk from Cornell
Woods
and
walk.
you'll get somebody.
Great.
to come
Awesome.
to your
Great resources. Yeah.
Another good app for plant identification is Plant Net. I use that one a lot and have good success with it.
Yep. PlantNet. Yep. Another good one. Excellent. Good. Yeah.
I'm not sure how it is with all counties. I used to work at my soil and water. So soil and water will usually it'll usually communicate with NRCS. So an NRCS person is much more likely to come out. If you want to talk with DEC, I personally have had my region forester come out. And that's really like you have to contact your region for DEC for them to do that. But I also am just like, I was friends with the Region 8 forester at the time. So I don't know like if everyone gets like a full day of a forester coming out to their property. It would kind of depend on the size of your property probably. But yeah, you would talk to your region for DEC. And if you're contacting soil and water, you could probably just go directly to NRCS. They're the ones that would then also have funding to help you do projects if you are interested in doing a project.
Awesome. And I will plug, I don't know if anybody's ever purchased from the Soil and Water DEC, but they do a great native plant sale in the spring. For those of you that have lots of land, or if you're doing a big project, very affordable native plants. And I was very surprised this year. I did a big order and I'm always with bare root sort of expecting maybe 50-50 at best. Almost every single plant is healthy and came up. So if you're looking for large, affordable starters, they have a great sale every spring.
And I would also say, having worked at soil and water, the different counties have different like quality and diversity of plants available. I used to work for Orleans County and it was not a big thing that we did. So there's not a huge variety available, but Genesee County had way better variety of native plants. So like, if your county doesn't have what you're looking for, try just looking at the counties around you and you might have
Good
better
idea.
luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. And another resource is going to be a poster. There's one in the back. You all are going to get it on a drive, I think, or we're going to forward it to you. It has a lot of the plants. It's for the whole United States. So if you know people in other places, there's plants for all over the United States. There's lots of the species I talked about today up there, and it goes into a little more depth. So feel free to reference that if you want to or need to. And I think we're almost at
Well,
time.
we can take one more question. I
One
actually
more?
have a question.
You have a
And I'm
question?
pretty sure my wife is gonna ask me. So you were. So can we supplement our bird feeders with insects like mealworms or stuff like that?
Yeah, mealworms are a common one. I generally don't feed birds in the warmer months. I take my feeders down because I want them to be utilizing my habitat that I've created and encourage that natural foraging. But if you want to feed them insects, you can do mealworms. And as a part of my work right now, we did research focal groups, and this cracked me up. There was a woman, she was from Alabama, loves her bluebirds, and found that they love mealworms, and she started her own mealworm growing conditions in her basement. And she's got 3 bins, and she's like raising mealworms. And she's got a lot of birds. So there you go. Start a mealworm farm. Yes, mealworms are great. Huh? Live ones. Live ones. She does live ones. Yeah. Yeah. Live ones will be more appealing to the birds. They will eat the dead ones, but they prefer the live ones.
Thank you, Becca. It was a great presentation.
Okay.
Let's give a round of applause. Thank you so much.